Hello YouTube, and welcome to Transformers Continuity for Dummies, in which I will be attempting to give a sort of concise explanation of how Transformers Continuity works. This was inspired by Ray, I Love Mess, who recently posted a video in which he was lamenting his lack of grasp of how Transformers Continuity works, and it's easy to understand why people wouldn't understand how it works, because over time, ever since the Transformers first came out in 1984, the mythology, the various storylines and story arcs and mythologies and differing lines have spawned a kind of uber mythology that's actually quite rich and complex. There's a lot of detail, a lot of stuff in it. Most pertinently, thanks to all of the various different divergent storylines and mythologies, we have the notion of the Transformers multiverse, which it seems that all sort of comic book style franchises have. You have the Marvel comics have it as well. They have there's not just one Marvel universe, there's a multiverse where different story arcs occur revolving around the same characters. Basically, you have the same characters in different universes where they've developed differently or evolved differently and followed different story arcs. It's best to think of it almost like a tree, like a branching system, or like just a tangled massive yarn, or one of those clotted spider webs that you sometimes see. It's very, very complex, and what this basically allows for is for characters to be emphasised differently, so that different aspects of their characters can be explored, and so on and so forth. For Transformers, this began very early on. It began in the 1980s with what we all affectionately call Generation 1, which are the different storylines that refer to the original toy line. And we have, there are lots of them. There are lots of... Generation 1 has multiple different story arcs, which all involve the same characters, the same basic core mythology, but with significant differences in emphasis or detail. So, for example, you have the Generation 1 cartoon continuity, which follows a different trajectory from the Generation 1 US comic, which follows a slightly different but related trajectory to the Transformers UK comic. They all have the same basic characters, the same basic setup. You still have the war on Cybertron, you still have Megatron founding the Decepticons, you still have Optimus Prime rising to lead the Autobot resistance, you still have the Ark crash landing on Earth, you have the Autobots and Decepticons taking on the guise of human vehicles and human machinery, and so on and so forth. But there are very significant differences in the way the storylines manifest. For example, the nature of the Transformers is different between each one. In the G1 continuity, in the G1 cartoon continuity, the Transformers are machines. They are actually created products. They were created by the Quintessons originally as comestibles, as things that could actually be sold, as not comestibles, but commodities rather. They were items that could be sold, but their artificial intelligence was actually more advanced than the Quintessons originally envisaged. And so they rose up against them and then founded Cybertron and founded their own little society, and so on and so forth. Whereas in the US and UK comics, their origins is it's more mythological. They are the creations of Primus, who is the sort of god of the Transformers, whose body is Cybertron. Cybertron is what's left of Primus's carcass, and his core consciousness is at the very heart of Cybertron. And they were created in a sort of Genesis-style mythology, and then you have Unicron as the devil of the Transformers universe, the force that is in elemental opposition to Primus. It's a much more sort of classical tale in the comics than it is in the cartoon. I actually prefer the cartoon origins to the comic origins. I find the whole Primus thing to be a little bit silly, to be perfectly honest. I don't know whether that's the atheist in me coming out, but I find the notion of the original consciousness of some supreme being creating the Transformers to be no answer at all. It's kind of silly. I mean, you sort of have to ask why. What's the point? But yes, and also more recently, we have other continuities developing within the Generation 1 mythos and with reference to the Generation 1 characters. For example, the Dreamwave continuity, that was an attempt to take all of the concepts that the fans seem to have taken on board as gospel from both the cartoons and the comics and meld them together in one Uber universe that was the core Transformers universe. It was an attempt to create the essential Generation 1 continuity, of which all others were echoes or offshoots and so on and so forth. It wasn't entirely successful in that regard, and unfortunately we never really got to see it manifested to any great degree because Dreamwave went under. We also now have the IDW continuity, which also has its own Generation 1 continuity. The IDW comics generally focus around Generation 1 characters and Generation 1 core concepts. Again, you have this notion of the Transformers engaging in some vast civil wars, Cybertron being torn by uprising and conflict, from which you have Megatron rising as the leader of the rebels, of the Decepticons, of the dissidents in Cybertronian society, and Optimus rising in opposition to Megatron. IDW is slightly different from the others in that it does away with certain core concepts. Insofar as I'm aware, I don't follow the IDW continuity that closely because I don't like it. But from what I gather, there's no Primus in the IDW continuity. There's no Unicron either. There is a Matrix, but the Transformers origins, I don't think it's been explored yet in the IDW universe, but there are certain core differences that are very significant. But it is still very much a Generation 1 continuity. It still comes under the umbrella, the overarching umbrella of Generation 1. In that it deals with the Generation 1 characters, the events of the Generation 1 era, which I suppose you could define as the pre-Beast Wars era. So that's Generation 1. That all occurs in its own clump. You have Generation 1, of which you have various different tributaries, all of which are different stories set within similar universes. Now, one of the things you said, Ray, was that I think it was under the TF Wiki, Beast Wars is accounted as part of the Generation 1 continuity. Well, although generally Beast Wars is regarded as a kind of self-contained era, the reason it's accounted part of Generation 1 is that it is a direct continuation of the Generation 1 story arc. The Maximals and Predacons, who are the predominant Transformer factions in Beast Wars, are the descendants of the Decepticons and the Autobots, and they are continuing the same war, the same conflict. The events of Generation 1 are the history of Beast Wars, essentially. Beast Wars is Generation 1 so many thousands of years on. The problem comes about in that if you watch the Beast Wars cartoon, there are certain problems in trying to relate it to any one Generation 1 continuity. It doesn't seem to follow on from any of them. And not any that have been defined thus far anyway. There are certain core concepts that are not in or in any of the existing Generation 1 continuities. Now, Dreamwave, in their Generation 1 continuity, they attempted to make the continuity that would eventually lead into Beast Wars, and so there are various different references to Beast Wars in that continuity, or to what would eventually spawn the Beast Wars Transformers. It's not entirely successful, it's not 100%. There are certain details that conflict with what is mentioned in the Beast Wars cartoon, but that's neither here nor there. Apparently, one of the rumours floating around is that Beast Wars was very tenuously linked to the Generation 2 comic. Now, Transformers Generation 2 is a bizarre blip in Transformers continuity. Technically, it follows on from Generation 1, but there is only one continuity in this regard that does that, and that's the Generation 2 comic, which generally didn't last very long and is by and large ignored as a kind of one of the many Generation 1 offshoot universes. It's generally not taken as gospel or as canon. And it's very difficult linking that into Beast Wars anyway, because there are no direct references to it. Apparently there's some rumour that the Vok, the alien race that were established in the Beast Wars cartoon, were supposed to be manifestations of a force that appeared originally in the Generation 2 comic, the Swarm, which was some sort of elemental offshoot of the Transformers race, which wasn't very well explained and was very confusing, and was a bit weird, to be perfectly honest. It was just like a replacement for Unicron. It was an all-consuming elemental force, and again, the way they got rid of it at the end of the Generation 2 continuity was just by using the fucking Matrix, which is the MacGuffin for everything in the Transformers universe. So, yeah, Beast Wars follows on directly from Generation 1, but not any particular Generation 1 continuity. For example, it does not follow on from the cartoon. It definitely does not follow on from the Generation 1 cartoon. There are far too many conflicts. It doesn't follow on from the UK comic, we know that, because the Nemesis is blown up in the UK comic. And it doesn't crash either, it's still orbiting Cybertron, Earth, actually. It orbits Earth for a very long time. And then is blown up when Galvatron hops back in time in Target 2006, I think. So yeah, there are many divergences. It seems that Beast Wars follows on from its own very particular Generation 1 continuity, which a lot of people regard as the core continuity, since Beast Wars is by and large one of the most popular stories or continuities in Transformers. Insofar as I'm aware, there aren't any particular divergent universes. I mean, they do exist. We have had references to the divergent Beast Wars universes where different things have happened, mostly in the universe line. The universe line is interesting because both the toys and the comics are set in this in the multiverse, not in any one particular universe, but they acknowledge the multiverse. The whole notion of universe is that the war between Primus and Unicron has reached a degree whereby they are actively plucking Transformers from different continuities, from different timelines and different possibilities, and reformatting them into these vast multiverse spanning armies. Unicron has intentions of devouring the entire multiverse. He is apparently him and Primus, by the way, are singularities by all accounts, as is Alpha Trion. As some Transformers, however many times they occur in different continuities, are the same entity. It's the same entity existing in different hopping from different universes. The Fallen is a good example. The Fallen apparently it's the same character as he appears in Dreamwave and in the movies. It's the same being, but with different just existing within different histories. It's the same basic consciousness. How that works, I don't know. And then you have Beast Machines, which is the end of the Generation 1 continuity. It's the end of the Generation 1 continuity in that it clearly follows on from Beast Wars, which clearly follows on from Generation 1. It's all part of the same very large and confusing and tumescent timeline. Beast Machines has... In fact, I'd argue that Beast Machines is even more Generation 1 than Beast Wars. It certainly has more references to Generation 1 concepts than Beast Wars. But more than Beast Wars, Beast Machines sets up the notion that what we have here is not any one particular Generation 1 universe, but a polyglot, a sort of core universe that has elements of all of the continuities thrown into it. Because in Beast Machines we have references to... There are references to the original comics, there are references to Transformers the movie, the 1986 movie, there are references to the Generation 1 cartoon, the Plasma Energy Chamber, the Key to Vector Sigma, and they don't fit together in any one of the universes that have been established for Generation 1. So Beast Wars and Beast Machines very much follow on from a particular Generation 1 universe, a sort of core universe that hasn't been defined properly yet in any continuity. Beast Machines thus far is the official end of the Generation 1 story arc. They were going to carry it on in Transtech, which was supposed to be the next step on. It was going to be the next toy line, the next cartoon, the next comic after Beast Machines, but it never worked. It never came off, unfortunately, which is a bit of a shame, but there is still potential there. Pardon me. There is still potential there for the Generation 1 Beast Wars, Beast Machines continuity to continue. I mean, we end with a reformatted Cybertron, a Cybertron that's techno-organic, and all of the Transformers that have ever been being reborn in reformatted techno-organic bodies. So there is potential there for just the most brilliant political and philosophical schisms in the Transformers universe. I mean, you could have Generation 1 Megatron coming back in a techno-organic form, Generation 1 Optimus Prime reborn in a techno-organic form, Alpha Trion, the original Transformers, the 13 original Transformers, and so on and so forth. Plus the Beast Machines and Beast Wars Transformers all together. The potential is huge there, and they should definitely. I mean, Hasbro should definitely make a toy line, or just some sort of special releases or something following on from the Beast Machines era. It could be so much fun. I mean, I can imagine Megatron and the reborn Decepticons despising the techno-organic Cybertron and their own techno-organic bodies in the same way that Beast Machines Megatron did. I can definitely see that, and starting the war all over again, but with a slightly different philosophy. That would be great. It'd be wonderful to see. But that's why, basically, Beast Machines and Beast Wars are accounted part of the Generation 1 continuity, because they are part of the same history, however fragmented and disjointed it is. But after that, you have the unrelated Transformers universes, the self-contained Transformers universes, like the Armada universe and the Energon universe and the RID universe. The Prime universe, you could say, is Generation 1, very much so. It's very much a Generation 1 universe, but aesthetically slightly removed. Animated is its own self-contained history. But even those have divergent universes and acknowledge the Transformers multiverse. I mean, if you read the Armada comics, at the very end of that story arc, you have minions of Unicron slipping into that reality who are from Generation 1 universes. You have Generation 1 Galvatron, Generation 1 Thunderwing, Generation 1 Scourge, Generation 1 Dirge, and so on and so forth. So it's this massive tumescent contradictory mass of continuities, and basically it's a way of doing away with contradictions. That's what the Transformers multiverse is for. It's what the Marvel universe is for too, and the DC multiverse, and so on and so forth. It's a way of saying, well, it doesn't matter because this story occurred in a separate universe from this one. It gives the writers carte blanche to do more or less what they like without reference to previous continuity, because there are always these divergent universes in which these alternative story arcs can occur. I mean, it needed to be done with Transformers, definitely, because you had the UK comic running simultaneously to the US comic originally in the Generation 1 era in the 1980s and 1990s. But the UK comic had taken characters from the US continuity and just run with them and develop them in ways that the US continuity did not. So you were getting all of these contradictions throwing up, and the explanations that were occurring within the comics for these contradictions did not make sense. For example, the Megatron clone at the end of the Time Wars in the UK comic, it's revealed that because Megatron dies at one point, where the US and the UK comics were one story arc, it's established in the US comics that he's just away for a very long time. He's considered dead, and you have Shockwave and Ratbat and Scorponok and various other Decepticon leaders taking over. In the UK comic, he's not. He's discovered, he's found, and he's resurrected. So he's wandering around and doing stuff in the UK comic where he's considered dead in the US comic. And to get around that, the UK comic, but the sad thing is he comes back later on in the US comic, and this is definitely established as the Megatron who was killed in a particular event. So you have two Megatrons running around. And to get around it, the UK comic writers claimed that the Megatron that had been running around in the UK comic was a clone created by Straxus, but that doesn't make any fucking sense at all. It doesn't even make the least bit of sense. For one thing, in the Time Wars, where you have Megatron and Galvatron fighting together, Galvatron is a future version of Megatron, and he's time jumped back, and you have Galvatron remembering what's happening to Megatron as he's seeing Megatron through his own eyes. So you either have to assume that in that case Galvatron must be made from the clone and is not Megatron, or it's not a clone. You see, it doesn't really make any sense at all. And also, you have to wonder why Straxus would do that. Why wouldn't Straxus, if you could create a body as powerful as Megatron's anyway, why the fuck would he create a perfect clone of Megatron with Megatron's personality? Why not just create a body for yourself that's perfectly powerful and capable, and just upload your own personality into it? Because it has Megatron's personality, this clone. It actually has Megatron's personality, and the two conflict all the time. It doesn't make any sense at all. It's just a way of getting around the contradictions. So even within particular continuities, you have these issues going on. So they needed the separate continuities in order to make it work. So yeah, that wasn't as succinct as I hoped it would be. It was probably very confusing. But there you go, that's how Transformers continuities work. They work like any other comic, sort of popular comic or franchise continuity, with all of these various storylines that often contradict one another, or which require justification from the established history. Which require justification from the established history. It's very, very tricky, and you know, there are some people, the sort of hardcore people, who regard one particular continuity as gospel or as canon. I think that's really stupid, to be perfectly honest, because there's no one that you can turn to that's established, or which is there's no basis by which you can determine what is canon. You just have these divergent universes, all of which have different qualities. Personally, my favourite Generation 1 continuity thus far, it's difficult to say. I kind of liked what Dreamwave were doing, but then they lost it. They lost it big time. I don't like IDW at all. I think it's a mess. Apart from Last Stand of the Wreckers, which is great. I don't like the G1 cartoon at all. I mean, it worked. As a kid, it was fine, and I have very fond, sentimental, nostalgic memories of it, but it doesn't stand up. Unlike many cartoons from the 80s, it doesn't stand up to modern viewing. It is one of the worst. It's one of the worst. It's just above Mask, insofar as I'm concerned. It's difficult to say. I like different ones for different reasons, but I think the UK comic is probably my favourite, simply because it's the most interesting. It does the most with the most characters, and it takes the story in some interesting directions. Even if some of the dialogue and the events are weird as hell. Transformers saying "ooh eck" and "oh my stars and garters" and stuff like that. It's really weird, really strange, kind of funny but weird. So yeah, there you go. That's how Transformers continuity works. It's a mess.